Welcome back to Southeast Asia Radio. This week, we'll have some sustainability and energy updates from you from all over Southeast Asia.
We'll also offer a friendly PSA, warning you of the dangers of robocalls. Remember, it could happen to you. Today is January 23rd, 2025. This week, Greg is joined by Sophal Ear to discuss the aftermath of Lim Kimya's assassination and the future of Cambodia. Before that, let's start with our headlines.
Let's get right into our first story. The United Arab Emirates' state energy firm, Masdar, reached a $15 billion renewable energy deal with the Philippines.
Okay, that's big news. So under the deal, Masdar will help the Philippines develop solar, wind, and battery energy storage systems with the goal of providing 1 gigawatt of clean power by 2030.
Much needed for sure. The Philippines is working to rehaul its fossil fuel-reliant energy grid.
If you all remember my U.S. investment in the Philippines presentation from October last year, the Philippines has so much potential for solar energy and wind energy. The country aims to hit 50% renewable energy by 2050, and it's currently at 32%.
Right, and because of the Public Services Act signed under Duterte, investments into the Philippine energy grid are growing.
Looking forward to seeing what this will do for the Philippine grid.
Definitely. Not to be outdone, but Malaysia's also making efforts at securing its energy future.
Oh, right. Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru took a 4-day trip to Southeast Asia and met with his Malaysian counterpart Anwar Ibrahim on January 10th.
They announced significant developments in the two countries' energy security cooperation, focusing on natural gas and hydrogen projects. Malaysia's Petronas State Oil Group will deliver carbon-neutral LNG to Japan's Shikoku Electric and Hiroshima Gas.
Huh? Isn't that just more fossil fuels then?
Correct, but Anwar mentioned that carbon-neutral LNG can be made possible through carbon capture technology, making it a very useful transition fuel.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. The two countries are also hoping to work together on hydrogen projects, with Anwar mentioning that Sarawak is leading a major project in collaboration with Japanese companies.
With both Malaysia and the Philippines kicking their economies into overdrive through high-tech manufacturing and digital services, their energy grids must catch up with the growing demand in a sustainable way.
Makes sense. Japan has been a reliable partner to both countries, and it'll be exciting to see what they can accomplish together in the coming years.
Yes, it will. But more broadly, Southeast Asian rideshare giant Grab is partnering with Chinese electric vehicle maker BYD to bring more EV options to the region.
That's right. The regional partnership will expand access to up to 50,000 BYD EVs to Grab's fleet partners and driver partners across Southeast Asia.
Drivers can either rent the cars from Grab's fleet partners or receive funding support through Grab's ownership car schemes.
The partnership spans Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, which are 6 of the 8 countries that Grab operates in.
And it seems that Grab's competitors are also trying to explore the EV market. In Indonesia, Gojek plans to replace all of its two-wheelers with electric bikes by 2030, while Vingroup's rideshare platform, Green and Smart Mobility, launched an electric taxi service in Jakarta last year, after success in both Vietnam and Laos.
Looks like it's the battle of the EVs. Only time will tell how successfully they will be implemented across the region.
We're ending the headlines today with a cautionary tale.
Right. So last week, Thailand's Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra revealed that she was almost scammed by an AI-powered robocall.
Paetongtarn was targeted by a call center using AI to mimic the voice of an unnamed neighboring ASEAN country's leader. The scammer attempted to solicit a donation on behalf of his quote-unquote country.
Paetongtarn detailed that the scammer reached out via voice note on an undisclosed chat application expressing interest in a partnership, and that she was responding via text message. The scammer later tried to call her at 11 p.m. at night when she was asleep.
The following morning, she sent the scammer an apology, asking to schedule a formal call to discuss cooperation. But the scammer proceeded to send another voice note, asking Thailand for a donation and falsely claiming that it was the only country to not contribute to the cause.
It wasn't until this voice note that she realized she was being scammed, additionally noting that the banking information provided did not belong to the neighboring ASEAN country.
See, I've heard of these types of scams before, but I never thought that they'd make it to a world leader. No one is safe.
No one is safe. Paetongtarn believes that the scammers got her contact from someone close to her who fell victim to the scammers.
She also noted that she has not informed the neighboring ASEAN leader who was impersonated.
Stay vigilant, everyone, and remember, it could happen to you. If you receive an urgent text asking for money or any of your personal information, it was probably a scam. If hesitant, make sure to call the scammer's alleged affiliation to clarify if the message is real.
And thank you for listening to our PSA. Did we miss anything that you wanted to hear about? If so, please write us at scaradio@csis.org or DM us on your favorite social media platform. Up next, Greg's conversation with Sophal Ear. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to another episode of Southeast Asia Radio. As always, I'm Greg Poling with CSIS. Unfortunately, this week I am not joined by co-host Alina Noor of the Carnegie Endowment. Alina is in Southeast Asia, and we just couldn't get the clocks to align this time. But we are joined by a returning guest, Sophal Ear. Sophal is a professor at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University, and last joined us to talk Cambodia, I think maybe a year and a half ago. We've got Sophal back today to do another update on Cambodia and U.S.-Cambodia relations. And the impetus for this was a rather tragic event recently. On January 7th, former Cambodian National Rescue Party parliamentarian Lim Kimya was assassinated in the heart of Bangkok by an assailant who was later arrested in Cambodia, provoking just waves of grief and remembrance across Cambodian expat community and those supportive of the opposition. So, Sophal, let me just throw it to you. Who was Lim Kimya, and what does his death say about the state of Cambodia?
Well, thank you, Greg. Lim Kimya was, as you say, a parliamentarian of the Cambodian National Rescue Party, which was dissolved, and therefore he was no longer a parliamentarian. He was a former parliamentarian. But I think he represented for many the kind of hope that others who've been assassinated, regrettably, have meant for Cambodians. People like Kem Lay, the political analyst, commentator, for example. Lim Kimya was outspoken. He was a French-Cambodian dual citizen. His wife is French, and he had worked in the Ministry of Finance of France for, I believe, 12 years, studied mathematics at the Royal University of Phnom Penh, was a tutor to people I know, people I respect, and their grief is apparent in the tributes they've paid to his life and legacy. I mean, just to put it together, his contributions as an educator, as a civil servant, as an activist, his work rallying support for justice and peace in Cambodia, and the fact that it happened on January 7th. Now, I don't know whether they picked that date for a specific reason, but historically, January 7th is the date that the ruling party considers to be a rather sacred one, the date of liberation for Cambodia from the Khmer Rouge when the Vietnamese took over Phnom Penh. And of course, on their coattails came Hun Sen and others who then ended up ruling Cambodia during the 1980s and still rule Cambodia today. So it's maybe coincidental, maybe it's not. It just happens to be that very special date that for many years was celebrated, and more recently is kind of a little less celebrated, or just more or less, it's not as ballyhooed as much as before. And I think it's just another tragic thing because so many of Cambodia's heroes get assassinated, and they've included Chut Th, the environmental activist, I mentioned Kem Lay, the political commentator, and so many others who fall victim to random attacks, the authorities claim, or some totally unrelated to politics murder. So it's very sad for Cambodians who want to hope for a better future for themselves and for their country.
I know this is all still speculative. I mean, we're only recording barely more than a week after the assassination. But any idea why now? The CNRP was dissolved, 7 years ago almost, 6.5 years ago.
Yeah, I've stopped counting. It's strange. Now, obviously, Lim Kimya chose to stay in Cambodia. He did not flee. He did not need to flee. He's a dual citizen. But it's obvious that he didn't stay quiet during all this time. He posted things that were critical. I think episodes that come to mind have to do with, just his assertion of misstatements by the then Prime Minister Hun Sen. And then I think Hun Sen then going to him and saying, do you swear that what you're saying is true, your accusation or whatnot? And I think he was more bold or more courageous or brave or perhaps foolish than most, and may have ended up on somebody's list of needing to be eliminated, because currently what's known is that this was a well-organized assassination. The guy who did it is a Thai national, former Marine, who says he owed a favor to somebody, And then there was a spotter on the bus that went from Siem Reap, where Lim Kimya took the transport to Bangkok, and who followed all the way. So a spotter who is a Cambodian national and apparently the brother of the individual who filed the suit or the complaint against the CNRP for its dissolution. So it's even more mind-boggling that they would combine somehow. I'd be unable to find somebody other than a relation, which seems very odd. And then now, of course, there's apparently a mastermind or somebody been named that is apparently an advisor to the prime minister, who the authorities have already said, that he has lots of advisors and they can do illegal things, and that's their problem. But it's just very circumstantial and suspicious that it's all pointing rather closely to those in power.
As you said, pretty much all the rest of the executive committee, the old executive committee of the CNRP, fled into exile, except, of course, Kem Sokha, who remained under house arrest. What does this say about the space left for independent criticism, organization, discussion in Cambodia? This combined with the shuttering of independent media outlets. I mean, is there space left to be critical at all within Cambodia in 2025?
Well, I think the shrinkage was already there. It has shrunk further with this. It continues to shrink. And I don't know if there's anything left, frankly, Greg. I mean, obviously, if there's one person still willing to say anything, then there's still apparently scope for complaining or for speaking out. But for those who one would have thought were untouchable, or at least, come on, in broad daylight, Bangkok, another country, Thailand, to do something like that so publicly is really to send a message. And that message is, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what legacy you have, what passports you hold, or what country you happen to be in. You can be gotten. And that's a powerful message. I think those who have fled to Thailand from the CNRP Executive Committee and others who are with the CNRP and are seeking refuge there and trying for a third country asylum are, I'm sure, freaking out because, this is the clearest way of sending a message to them that they're vulnerable.
Have we heard any response from Thai authorities?
Well, the courts in Thailand appear to be working rather efficiently in terms of discovering what's happened. So the CCTV footage is already out there on YouTube. The demand for the extradition and immediate response by the Cambodian authorities of returning this Thai ex-Marine motorbike taxi driver back to Thailand. I believe in the latest I saw, he's saying that he can't name the mastermind, but they're obviously finding things in terms of CCTV footage, identifying the spotter. So there's an Interpol red notice on that individual who is, as I mentioned, apparently related to the guy who filed the complaint against the CNRP and led to the dissolution of the CNRP as per ruling of the Cambodian Supreme Court. So whatever they're doing, they're finding things. And they've got the French also saying, we'll be watching this closely, Thailand. So it's not as if they have much of a choice. And I think in terms of the credibility of the Thai justice system here, it's showing itself to be quite credible in investigating this particular situation. Now, are they going to get to the very bottom of who's behind all this? I don't know, but they're making a lot of progress in only a few days.
We're now, a year and a half, I guess, into the Hun Manet era in Cambodia. He took over from his father as prime minister in mid-2023 after the elections. And there was, I would say, extremely cautious optimism. Maybe optimism is even the wrong word, but some curiosity from quarters in Washington and elsewhere about whether or not this would mark a shift, an opening in Cambodia.
Yeah.
I don't want to overinterpret a single event, but have we seen any evidence in the last 18 months that Hun Manet is different than his father?
Well, obviously, I think he's not as hot-tempered or, let's just say, easily excitable in terms of getting him to say things that are wacky and outrageous.
Fewer hot mic incidents.
The case. And look, and he's gotten results insofar as obviously the first thing that happened was the release of a suspended $18 million, I think it was, in U.S. funding that because of the election was stopped and neither free nor fair. And then, of course, you had the visit of the U.S. Secretary of Defense. And then in 8 years of no ship visits, a U.S. Navy ship came to Sihanoukville. And there you have it, a kind of thawing of relations, at least at the military level. So he can point to increased diversification of Cambodia's partners, especially in a year, 2024, when there were apparently no new major of any kind, perhaps infrastructure loans to Cambodia. So on the one hand, you have the Chinese being kind of reticent about further financing infrastructure in Cambodia, especially with this demand for the Funan Techo Canal being built. And on the other hand, you've got, I guess, more willingness to engage with the United States, at least at the military level, and willingness from the U.S. military to engage with Cambodia. And of course, you've got Japan also agreeing or being allowed to visit Ream Naval Base, which is, of course, the site of much consternation, dispute, questions about what exactly China is doing at Ream and why these two ships are always parked there. And I'm sure your satellite images, courtesy of CSIS, are monitoring that very carefully. But I think the cover story now is that they will be given to Cambodia. That's why they're parked there. They just haven't had the keys handed over quite yet. They're training on them.
As an aside on Ream, that's exactly right. The two Chinese corvettes arrived in December of 2023. They've now been there for over a year. That's not a ship visit. You don't send two corvettes for over a year. So yes, now the Chinese say they're going to turn it over to Cambodia and that they will turn over all of the base once work's done. That has been delayed. It was supposed to happen, I think, this past September. Now it's pushed into a time in early 2025. But everybody knows that PLA personnel have been resident in the base for a couple years now. They're clearly going to have exclusive access to the northern part of the base. And Cambodian officials keep saying, no, it's open to any friendly Navy to visit. And yet, as you said, the U.S. Navy ship didn't visit Ream. It visits Sihanoukville. The Japanese have sent naval ships that have not been allowed to go to Ream. They've only been allowed to go to Sihanoukville across the bay. So until I see a non-Chinese naval ship pull up to that dock and have access to the whole base, we're going to assume that the 2019 MOU that leaked, which so far seems to be being followed through to the letter, is still true, that China has exclusive access to a big chunk of that. But, that 2019 MOU is what put the U.S.-Cambodia relationship under the first Trump administration into a deep freeze. Mike Pence demanding that the Cambodian government, answer for that, explain the MOU. That became the dominant headline throughout the Trump administration. And then we saw a little bit of a thaw in 2021 for Cambodia's ASEAN chairmanship. That slammed shut. Then we saw another, I think, effort by the U.S. to put its toe in the water in 2023 in the lead up to the election and Hun Manet's transition. But then the Cambodian government went ahead and banned the Candlelight Party, the much weaker successor to CNRP, for no reason. Right. It now feels cyclical, right? We did a white paper on Cambodia, Charles Dunstan and I.
That was the last time we spoke.
You and a few others had taken part in discussions. I mean, we didn't agree on everything, but one thing we did complain about was it feels like this constant pendulum in U.S.-Cambodia relations. Like a little bit of optimism, mostly driven by fear of China. China's going to be the dominant party in Cambodia, so we have to re-engage. And then something happens, and we slam the door shut entirely for a year or two, and then put our headbutt back up above the barricades. Where in that cycle do you expect we are going to be? This is going to come out after the inauguration, so you can speak in the future to a Trump administration already in place.
My sense is that the U.S.-Cambodia relationship has swung back towards a warmer relationship than it has been in the past, but only at the military level, right? So it's the SecDef to Minister of Defense to the Prime Minister, a West Point alum. This opens, I'm sure, credibility, opens doors, and allows more conversation to take place and a feeling of, well, you're one of us, right? And accept that he can play the part, but he hasn't necessarily accepted any of that. But I think that we're in that phase. I don't know that in the next phase, it's necessarily going to keep increasing. And look, from my standpoint, and I've been fighting for human rights, democracy, freedom of speech in Cambodia, I still see my old friend Thierry Sang in prison, U.S. citizen, granted, Cambodian national as well, but I thought they were going to do more for her after the release of the 18 million that had been frozen. I thought that we were going to see something happen. The only thing we've seen really that's somewhat positive is when Mekdara, the erstwhile journalist, Twitter guy, was arrested. I think the complaints were so loud that the authorities decided it was more trouble to keep him under arrest than to let him go. And so when the USAID administrator came, that was one of the positive things. He got out. Of course, with every step forward in Cambodia, there's a step backward, it feels like. It's almost Sisyphean in terms of how that relationship between the two countries unfolds, right? So there's a little bit of progress. It seems like there's maybe something to celebrate, and then Lim Kimya gets murdered, right? And then I'm sure the signal is going to be, wow, we thought things were getting better. And I think whether it's the autopsy or the prognostications of like, Hun Manet is not who we thought he was going to be. Well, who did you think he was going to be? And is it in fact not consistent with operating within a system that requires loyalty, requires patronage, and requires the continuation and survival of the regime? So pretty consistent with that.
Let's close with a look farther afield, because I don't feel like it's all that productive for us to lay out our recommendations for Trump administration engagement, because I think we would know what they are. They're going to be the same that he would have had for any administration. But structurally, how stable do you think that the CPP regime is if we look out over the long term? How reliant is it on Hun Sen still being there, head of the party, Senate president, presumably pulling a lot more strings than Hun Manet would let on? Is there still possibility of a generational change that couldn't happen in 2023? And maybe Hun Manet is, people should temper their expectations about him being the instrument of that change. But that will be inevitable, maybe, as the war generation leaves the scene.
Look, Greg, I think it is inevitable. Change is coming. In fact, if you look at 2023, they literally handed off all the ministries to the mostly sons, though I think the central bank was handed to the daughter. And if one had hoped for like radical new shifts in policy and directions and so on, that certainly did not happen. The necessity of Hun Sen being on the scene, I think it's kind of paradoxical. You look at Cambodia and you think, well, things have been the same way, the same people, same environment, policies, whatnot, for decades. So it'll just continue that way. But at the same time, I would say it's maybe even more fragile than we realize, because the more I think the authorities try to strangle what left there is of human rights, of freedom, of free speech, of democracy, the more I think people inevitably react. And it may not be in the way that a Libya changes or a Syria changes overnight. I mean, who would have thunk even there that resistance would be sweeping in so quickly and the regime would fall after so many years seemingly in power and irascibly there? But I don't know. I think in the long term, there's got to be change. People don't live forever, Greg. And so they've got to go. And at some point, their kids, whether they're in power now because titularly they are in that role, but whether they actually hold the reins, they'll eventually hold, whoever it is will hold the reins that's different from today. And that is, I think, the hope that one must have for Cambodia, that the change that is inevitably coming will have to manifest itself, hopefully not violently, but hopefully in a way that improves the lot for people and gives them more voice in how their country is run.
It is, I think, a rare thing to end a policy discussion about Cambodia on a high note. So I'm just going to end it there. I think that's the best we're going to do. Sophal, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Greg. Pleasure.
And thanks all of you for listening. Alina will be back, I hope, in 2 weeks for our next episode of Southeast Asia Radio.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Southeast Asia Radio. Feel free to write us with any comments, questions, or feedback at searadio@csis.org. We'll get back to you.
Do us a favor and subscribe and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever streaming platform that you listen to us on. Tell your friends about us.
Marla Hiller is our producer. Our host today was Greg Poling. My name is Japhet.
And I'm Lauren Mai.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode of Southeast Asia Radio.